As someone who is really into Rick and Morty theories and different forms of media, I decided to create a modern Rick and Morty iceberg because a lot of the existing ones are outdated or don't really dive as deep as they can. So today I will be diving from the very surface of Rick and Morty knowledge to the deepest depths in a deep dive into my Rick and Morty iceberg. Some entries come from older icebergs, but a lot of them I completely came up with myself. Let me know if I missed anything you feel is important, and with that being said, let's begin. Level 1. Anime. Starting off with one of the most criticized things that Rick and Morty has ever done, the Rick and Morty anime. Beginning March 29th, 2020, during the hiatus between the first and second half of Season 4, and going well into 2021, Adult Swim blind released short anime-style Rick and Morty films, all of which were written and directed by Takashi Sano. In 2022, Adult Swim would go on to greenlit an entire 10-episode season of the Rick and Morty anime, hiring Sano back to do so. Despite the effort put into the show and the high bar set by the main show, the Rick and Morty anime was a complete disaster. The level of discourse surrounding the show made it at one point one of the most talked about shows just because of how bad it was. It wasn't really entertaining from the standpoint of a Rick and Morty fan, and it certainly wasn't going to gain its own audience. But no matter how much people hated the show, there's no such thing as bad publicity, and that's the reason that this is at the surface level of Rick and Morty media. Schezwan sauce. Schezwan sauce was a sauce at McDonald's from 1998 promoting the movie Milan. In Rick and Morty's world, Rick remembers the sauce very well, and in the Rick Shank Redemption, Rick stalls by going to visit a memory version of McDonald's to try and get more of the sauce. Immediately when the episode premiered, Schezwan sauce went nuclear and fans began begging McDonald's to bring it back, and eventually they did for just one day on October 7th, 2017, and later for a longer window starting February 26th, 2018. Currently, you can find people auctioning off the last remnants of the sauce on eBay for hundreds of dollars. This whole thing was one of the most impactful Rick and Morty events out there, and the fans' behavior definitely contributed to an overall bad reputation. Space Jam cameo. Space Jam is a famous movie franchise bringing the likes of classic Looney Tunes characters to the world of basketball to play alongside greats like Michael Jordan and LeBron James. In the second movie, Rick and Morty make a very family-friendly appearance, dropping off one of the characters from their experimentation. Given that Rick and Morty is owned by Warner Bros., it made sense on how they could have appeared, but that didn't seem like something they would actually want to do. In a recent episode, however, our Rick and Morty killed the Rick and Morty who did appear, officially confirming they weren't the ones in the movie. Rick is immortal. This entry refers to Rick's invincibility throughout the show and how Rick C-137 is more or less immortal. Operation Phoenix is a protocol Rick has had since Season 2 which reroutes his mind into a clone body whenever he dies. At the end of Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, Rick axed the whole project, but in a later season when Rick died again, he got rerouted to a different dimension entirely. So basically when Rick dies, he's just gonna show up somewhere else and be revived. Rick also has so many technological enhancements, his body is almost completely indestructible as well. Rick also has ways to reverse aging, so that won't be a problem either. But how other Ricks die so easily, I have no idea. But Rick C-137 is functionally immortal. Pocket Mortys. Pocket Mortys was a mobile game released in 2016 that had respectable popularity among Rick and Morty fans. It was a Pokemon parody where instead of fighting creatures, you collected and fought Mortys. The game had so much content within it, but unfortunately, just a few months ago in April, the game shut down permanently. There was a lot to this game, so if you want a more in-depth breakdown, I highly recommend checking out my video I made about the history of the game and its impact. Episode titles are references. This entry refers to how Rick and Morty episode names are references to other media. Typically, episodes are named after movies, usually adding the family's names where they fit to make a parody name. For example, Mort Ragnarok, which is a reference to the Marvel movie Thor Ragnarok. A lot of the time though, the films featured have a strong connection to the contents of the episode. In this case, Rick and Morty travel to Valhalla, and the episode revolves around a lot of Norse mythology concepts. And the Thor movies are about Thor, who obviously is a god in said Norse mythology, and Ragnarok is also a major event in Norse mythology. Post-credit scenes. After every episode, except for 1 or 2 in Season 1, there is always a post-credit scene. These scenes are usually random or serve as an epilogue for what just happened. My favorite are the ones where Mr. Poopy Butthole breaks the fourth wall. If you haven't seen these before, maybe you should stop skipping the credits. Beth's clone. In Season 3, Rick gave Beth the choice to explore the universe, much like he did when he was younger, and he told her that he could make a clone of her to stay back with the family. This scene kind of went off the radar until the season 4 finale, where we get introduced to Space Beth and find out that one of the two Beths is a clone. Clearly the one who would know the truth would be Rick, but he revealed that he scrambled the two Beths, making it impossible to know which Beth is real. To this day, Space Beth makes regular appearances on the show, and we still don't know which Beth is real. But at the end of the day, neither one is Rick's real daughter or Morty's real mom, so does it really matter? Level 2. Comics. Rick and Morty and the publishing company Oni Press had a long-lasting partnership that resulted in over 120 unique issues across the mainline, miniseries, and standalone issues. Unfortunately, the comics ended in March of 2020 and came back in 2023, but ultimately ended again in December of that year. The comics starred Rick and Morty, but in order to prevent confusion and too much overlapping with the main show, we aren't actually following Rick C-137 and Morty Prime from the series, but their Dimension C-132 counterparts. Sometimes the events of the show mirrored the comics, but for the most part, they all are not canon. However, some of the characters from the comics, like Doofus Jerry, are on a lot of fans' wish list to eventually become a villain in the main show. Web games. In the 2010s, every show, movie, and franchise started dishing out their IP for their very own games that can be run from your browser. Of course, Rick and Morty was no different, and so, on 3 separate occasions, Adult Swim uploaded simple Rick and Morty games to their site. The first of the games was the most extensive, being Rick and Morty's rushed licensed adventure, which is purposely low quality, and they make fun of that in the game itself, including 4 chapters and a lot of Easter eggs, and the game contains a lot of content. I actually played through it and most of the other Rick and Morty games in another video if you want to see more. Anyways, this game was supported via Flash, and unfortunately Adult Swim would go on to stop hosting online games to their site, and eventually Flash would shut down completely, meaning this game is unplayable unless you use a third-party Flash player. After the first game came a quite disturbing game, Elastic Man, which you can still access on their website. The game has virtually no gameplay except pulling and tugging on a squishy 3D render of Morty. So if that's something you're into, hey, maybe it's the game for you. Finally, there is a little web game that allows you to fully customize your own Rick and Morty character. It's appropriately named Go Rick Yourself, and I do recommend checking it out. It's quite a bit of fun. Now, there's also a little sandbox game on the Adult Swim website called Adult Swim Soup, but unlike the other games, this one only features Rick and Morty characters, and it's not entirely about them. Mobile games. Unfortunately, Adult Swim seems to hate their fans because now both of the Rick and Morty mobile games have been shut down. We already talked about Pocket Mortys in a previous entry, but there was another game before that even came out. In 2014, really early in the show's life, Adult Swim published Jerry's Game. Now, even if you haven't heard of it before, because in seasons 1 and 2, they use it as a way to show how dumb Jerry is, because he ends up playing that game while ignoring everyone and completely unaware of his surroundings. In Jerry's Game, you literally just pop balloons as they appear, and that's all there is to it. Just like Pocket Mortys, this game is no longer available on either the App Store or the Google Play Store. RIP to the Rick and Morty mobile gaming scene. President Curtis spinoff. This entry refers to the new spinoff currently underway for Rick and Morty, and it stars the fan favorite character Andre Curtis. At the time of writing this video, the show is going to be premiering on Adult Swim in about a month, and I look forward to it, even if the last spinoff was a disaster. The show hasn't got a trailer yet per se, but from the looks of the teasers, it should be at minimum the second best Rick and Morty spinoff. Roiland and Harmon's Controversies. Now, a lot of people have heard about the different controversies of Justin Roiland, but at the same time, his ex-co-partner, Dan Harmon, had similar incidents on his previous show, Community. Roiland and Harmon's conflicts ended completely different due to Dan Harmon taking accountability and issuing sincere apologies. However, Roiland had too much going against him to continue his work on the show. Even though the both of them had a history of cruel and inappropriate behavior in the workplace, Dan Harmon changed his ways, and he became far more of a benefit to Rick and Morty than Justin, who never changed and was a detrimental flaw to the show having to be fixed. Rick's fears. Now, this entry refers to the fact that Rick, being someone who has limitless power, has seen almost everything the world has to offer, and yet he has some incredibly simple and quite funny fears. Rick literally backs down to no man, but for some reason he is deadly afraid of pirates. Not even just our Rick, but also all Ricks in the Central Finite Curve seem to be uneasy at anything related to pirates. Rick also seems to be afraid of squirrels, but then he isn't afraid of being burnt alive by a fire-breathing dragon. Rick also briefly mentions that he had a fear of wicker furniture, but he left that fear to Cornelius Daniel, so even though he won't have to deal with that fear anymore, it's still the most bizarre one. Apart from these gag fears, Rick also has deep down psychological fears explored in the fear hole, but given he never actually went inside, we don't know what fears are real and which ones are not. Game collabs. One of my favorite things Rick and Morty has done is their partnership with games. Unfortunately, most of the cosmetics are locked behind paywalls or exclusivity. Dota 2 released 2 Rick and Morty packs, Rocket League added a whole bunch of Rick and Morty accessories, Rainbow Six Siege added in tons of Rick and Morty skins, and of course, Fortnite, which I personally own and main all of the skins. Anyways, besides the paying aspect of some of the collabs, other games like Move or Die, Gang Beast, Multiverses, and Amateur Surgeon 4 have had completely free character packs or events. The Amateur Surgeon collab is by far the most extensive, with over 12 types of Rick and Mortys added to the game. There were also Rick and Morty themed dragons and merged dragons, which inherently were free, but since merged dragons follows the freemium model, you most likely had to dish out some money to unlock everything. The cat. The final entry for this level refers to the cat. Well, this cat is very special. If you remember from Season 4 Episode 4 where Morty gets a dragon and Jerry gets a talking cat, this would be normal for the show. Except for the fact that the cat's backstory is so disgusting, it makes Rick even unsettled. The last time we've seen Rick so disturbed was on the Purge planet, when he was initially excited to watch the planet Purge, but once he saw it in person, it was more than he could handle. Because the creators never gave a solid explanation for the cat, of course theories absolutely took over. Some people say that the cat maybe committed some sort of unspeakable heinous genocide. There's so many different ideas and no real answer, making this cat one of the most controversial and mysterious characters in the whole show. Level 3. Gravity Falls crossover. Rick and Morty's creator Justin Roiland and Gravity Falls creator Alex Hirsch both were good friends, and around the mid-2010s, they had referenced one another's shows countless times. In Gravity Falls, one of the characters loses 3 specific items into a portal, and in Rick and Morty, these exact items come out of a portal made by Rick. In Season 2, 3, and in the Rick and Morty Rickstaverse game, we can see an image of one of the main characters in Gravity Falls, Bill Cipher. Some of the Rick's mind blowers are references to Gravity Falls as well, and in the Citadel, 2 Mortys are dressed like the 2 main characters in Gravity Falls. And finally, in the Toxin world, another character from Gravity Falls is seen. There was another means to have the 2 shows collaborate, bringing this background character named Rainbow Suspenders Guy, who shows up everywhere in Rick and Morty, to both shows. He was supposed to appear in Gravity Falls, and using the Roman numerals on his suspenders, it would spell confidence, because he wanted people who were staying home watching shows this closely enough to catch on to this, to have a little confidence and make some friends. Anyways, since Gravity Falls ended sooner than expected, the collaboration never finished, so Rick and Morty hasn't really appeared in any actual Gravity Falls episodes, but it has been referenced numerous times in other Gravity Falls media, like this book with outlines of different Rick and Morty characters, like a Plumbus, and one of the Zygerian scammers from Season 1. There's also a few mentions to Rick, like this text that translates to Rick was here, and a capsule with his name on it. And finally, the faces of evil Rick, Morty, and Jerry have all appeared. It's a shame that the collab was never finalized, but there is definitely enough connection which leads a lot of fans to believe Rick and Morty and Gravity Falls exist in the same universe. Shorts. Including the previously mentioned anime shorts, Rick and Morty has made dozens of short videos uploaded to YouTube. In 2016, Rick and Morty word for word reenacted the case State of Georgia vs. Denver Fenton Allen, renamed Judge Morty, State of Georgia vs. Rick Allen. Rick and Morty also had a famous Australian parody named The Bush World Adventures. The most extensive of the Rick and Morty shorts were the non-canonical adventures, a series of claymation shorts parodying famous movies with Rick and Morty. All of the shorts can be found on YouTube, and I will link them below. There are more shorts, but some of them deserve their own entry. Simpsons Couch Gag. The Simpsons, being the longest actively running TV show ever, have done almost everything. One of their most famous gags is their intro, specifically the couch gags. In one episode, The Simpsons collaborated with Rick and Morty for their own gag. In this clip, The Simpsons are sitting on their couch, then Rick and Morty, with Morty behind the wheel, crash into them, instantly goopifying the whole family. Morty uses some of the Simpsons goop, bringing it to an alien store and cloning them, while Rick loots the Simpson house, taking anything and everything. In the end, the Simpsons end up heavily mutated to look like Rick, because Rick says that he washed his test tube with spit. This was a funny gag and probably one of my favorite Rick and Morty collabs. The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Marty. In 2006, years before Rick and Morty ever existed, Justin Roiland created a series of shorts, both to parody Back to the Future and protesting against Bill Cosby's lawyer sending him a cease and desist letter. The shorts follow Doc and Marty, who are clearly just old mock-ups of Rick and Morty, but the shorts are very vulgar, and the jokes are a little too far compared to what modern Rick and Morty is. 7 years after these shorts were made, Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon partnered up to transition this old offensive series into a lovable and funny one on Adult Swim. I'll let you guess what they called it. The Boys episode. In 2022, the TV series The Boys released a parody show called The Boys Presents Diabolical. It only lasted 1 season, but within that season was an episode written by Justin Roiland and animated in his style, which is the same one used in Rick and Morty. The episode plays out much like a Rick and Morty episode, and since all the same people made it, it's basically just an alternate dimension Rick and Morty episode. NFTs. Rick and Morty has a long list of Funko Pops made over the years. Some of these are harder to get than others because of their age. However, you could have at least purchased them normally up until 2024, when Rick and Morty decided to make NFT Funko Pops. Now, instead of just going to the store and buying a Rick and Morty Funko Pop, for these exclusive ones, they made it so you have to buy packs to unlock digital cards of the characters, with only a few rare hard-to-get cards actually being redeemable into the physical pops. This is very deceptive and a dangerous form of consumerism, because a lot of the people who end up buying these packs are children, or parents wanting to get them for their children. This is more or less a form of gambling, and it's pretty sad because look how cool these Funko Pops are. Besides the shady Funko Pop scandal, Justin Roiland also created his own line of NFTs that made him 1,300 Ethereum, which is equal to $1,650,000, just for drawings like this. He also worked on another NFT line that had $12 million in trading volume in just its first day. They of course are in Justin's style, so they all look like they're straight out of Rick and Morty. Family Guy. In season 19 of Family Guy, Stewie, instead of using his own technology, uses Rick's portal gun to travel, explaining to Brian why it's justified.
I borrowed it from Rick and Morty. They borrowed plenty from us.
Now, I don't really get why they made this joke. I've watched almost every episode of Family Guy, and I've for sure watched every Rick and Morty episode dozens of times, and I never really noticed something stolen between the two shows. Now, Rick is very similar to Stewie in their overall abilities, however, Rick and Morty uses extensive research to keep their sci-fi nonsense about as scientifically accurate as you can get. Meanwhile, Family Guy does whatever the writers want. If you're gonna call out Rick and Morty for copying generic and popular stuff, like interdimensional travel and robots, then that's crazy, because Family Guy is definitely not the first for almost anything. Interdimensional cable websites. Interdimensional cable commercials appear all throughout the show, however some of them have a real-world connection. Some of the ads give links that actually work. For example, in the Story Train episode, a commercial tells you to go to story-train.com, and if you do just that, you will get redirected to the Rick and Morty website. Similarly, the Rick Plushie website mentioned by Storylord, rick-plush.biz, also takes you to the website. And funnily enough, a fan-made website exists for realfakedoors.com. Before I continue on to the next level, please consider subscribing to my channel and hyping the video if you enjoyed so far. It means a lot, and I put a lot of work into this iceberg. Thank you, and let's get back into it. Level 4, Vindicators 2. This was a short 10-episode spin-off of Rick and Morty featuring the Vindicators from Season 3. If you remember from the original episode, Morty finds out that they previously met without Rick and Morty in a big adventure that lost a lot of their members. While in this short series on YouTube, it uncovers the deeper aspects of the Vindicators and really goes to show how bad of people they really are. Again, I will link the whole series in the description. These shorts are really cool and funny, and they say a lot about Rick and Morty as a whole. Most of the fans have actually never seen or ever even heard of the series, and it's been pretty obscure since its release. If you want to hear more, my first video on this channel was actually a breakdown of the series. Season 3 premiere. This entry refers to the unusual way that Adult Swim aired the Rick and Morty Season 3 premiere. 1 year and 9 months after the conclusion of Season 2, completely unannounced, Season 3 premiered with the episode Rick Shank Redemption on April 1st, 2017. Then for the remainder of that night, they looped the episode constantly. Since it was April Fool's Day, this was a prank technically by subverting the audience's expectations and giving them exactly what they wanted. Season 2 ended on a major cliffhanger and left the fate of Rick completely unknown just for Season 3 to show up out of nowhere and start like this.
Anyway, that's how I escaped from space prison! Whoa, scary place.
Kyle. In the Season 5 premiere, Mort dinner Rick Andre, Rick's nemesis Mr. Nimbus, at the sight of Morty, tells him he prefers his old one.
I liked your other one more. What was his name? Kyle?
What?
Nothing.
Also in Season 5, Rick spins a wheel of things to replace Morty with, and on the wheel, there's Kyle 2.0. he hasn't really been mentioned in any capacity since season 5, causing a lot of theories to stir up. The most popular one suggests he is an old sidekick of Rick, most likely being another Morty even. People also think that maybe it could be Morty's older brother, or a clone of Rick. In season 2 there was another scientist named Kyle in Zeep's Teenyverse, but that would be almost 100% impossible to be our Rick's Kyle. This is one of the most unanswered things in the whole show, and until we get more information, we only have the theories. Dog World. Similar to the real animated adventures of Doc and Marty, Dog World was another show Justin Roiland worked on prior to Rick and Morty that later inspired the show. You'll notice that a lot of similarities exist between Dog World and Rick and Morty, like the dads being both named Jerry, the pet in Dog World being named Ruffles while Morty's dog is named Snuffles. The main family of dogs are the same breed as Snuffles. One of the main characters sounds very similar to Morty.
I think that's a great idea, Mr. and Mrs. Doggerson.
And they have the same theme song. On their TV, they have an ad for a food later appearing on Rick and Morty as well. And one of the characters from Dog World even appears in a Rick and Morty promo. Unfortunately, Dog World never got finished, so all there will ever be is a single animatic. If you haven't already, go check out the full animatic on YouTube. It's pretty interesting that there is a world where we got this instead of Rick and Morty. Unknown Baby. In the episode Get Swifty, Morty takes Rick's portal gun, but he ends up getting lost, eventually finding his way to Bird Person's planet. A normal sequence to the show. But inside of his house is where it gets weird. And I'm not talking about Tammy. In Bird Person's house, he has a photo of Rick holding a baby Morty, but instead of recognizing himself, Morty is just confused. Because of his reaction, this led me and many others to believe that this baby is not actually Morty. Another reason supporting this is that when Morty sees Rick's scanned memories, we can see Rick doesn't enter Morty's life until Morty is already a teenager. Which gets even more weird because in season 1, when evil Rick scans Rick's brain, there is a memory of a toddler Morty. Again, this can't be Morty because we just saw he didn't even know this Morty until way past this age. It's very weird, and it's just like the whole Kyle situation all over again. But then again, this baby could very well be Kyle, or even a brother of Beth, Terryfolds. This entry refers to the song in the episode titled Rest and Rick Laxation when newly detoxed Rick and Morty turned on the radio. Seems like a pretty normal joke song, the show's had plenty of these. But this one was different because right after this episode came out, fans flooded the song, gaining millions of streams overnight. With all the attention the song got, it reached as high as 33rd on music billboards for hot rock songs. That's an impressive feat for anyone, so the fact that a random joke Rick and Morty song did it is hilarious. Rick is suicidal. Rick across the show has almost always been seen drinking and seemingly depressed. This has led Rick to attempt on multiple occasions to end his own life. After his hive mind partner Unity broke up with him, Rick took a highly powerful machine to his head, but just as it's about to fry him to dust, he passes out from all the harmful chemicals he took. And in season 7, when Rick and Jerry swap minds, Rick immediately resorts to attempting to end it all. While he has been very depressed and suicidal at times, it only seems to represent very low points of the show, and overall he seems fairly fine. Evidence that can show this is how he saves Morty's life in a wrinkle in time, instead of his own, but instead of accepting his fate, he prays and runs at the opportunity to make it out alive. So sometimes he gets a little sad, but Rick is just a guy with a lot on his plate. Justice League. This entry simply refers to the 2017 Justice League movie where inside of Barry Allen, aka Flash's house, he has a bunch of TVs. On one of the TVs, he has playing this one scene from the episode Something Rick This Way Comes. Level 5, Clone Rumble. This is in my opinion the best Rick and Morty game, and it was only soft launched in a few countries. Rick and Morty Clone Rumble is a game that looks like Pocket Mortys, except everything is 3D. There's more features, and you're not forced to only use Mortys for battle. This game honestly looks so cool, and I'm pretty mad we never even got a full release. It looks like they would have spent so long developing this game for nothing. And because of the short window you had to play it and limited reach, the game only has a few videos on YouTube with a couple thousand views max. I would have gladly grinded Clone Rumble, so it's a shame that it's gone forever. Corrupt Stream. This entry is about the 2022 Adult Swim April Fool's stream, which included full episodes from various shows. One of which is Rick and Morty, of course. In the stream, the episodes weren't normal, but instead they were being affected by a creepy corruption. The episode they used was Total Recall, one fans are very familiar with, so it ended up confusing a lot of people. The stream was joined by these two little characters as well, who would appear at the start and end of the episode. Most of the episode is normal, except for a few occasions when the episode starts to look straight out of a horror movie. You can find the full stream on YouTube, and I recommend watching at least the Rick and Morty part, because it makes it feel more scary at least than any episode of the normal show. Deleted lines. Justin Roiland has shown over the years that his style of comedy is a bit controversial to say the least, and in early seasons he did a lot of takes for his lines that ended up being a little too inappropriate or didn't fit the vibe of the show. He also famously drunk in order to perfect his Rick voice, which as you can expect, would cause a lot of chaos. Since Rick and Morty were both voices coming straight from Roiland, he also used them in questionable ways. Given the way Roiland was caught messaging underage fans, it's not crazy to assume he was doing so while giving Rick and Morty voice impressions. And while he is no longer a part of the show, both Rick and Morty are still technically his voice after all. Subway commercials. In 2015, Rick and Morty partnered up with Subway to release Rick and Morty themed advertisements. However, the main focus of these ads, Jared Fogle, proved controversial after being arrested right when the ads were finishing up. Due to the events, Subway cut ties with him, and hence the commercials had to be scrapped. Justin Roiland did say, however, that he made copies of the commercials and put them onto thumb drives, which he hid. Still though, there has never been any surface clips from the ads, and as it stands, the contents of the ads are mainly unknown. Shameless. This entry refers to another more niche appearance of Rick and Morty in other shows. While most other appearances are marked on the official wiki fandom, this is not. In an episode of the series Shameless, one of the main characters is seen watching Rick and Morty's pilot. I don't know if it was intentional, but it definitely is a nice Easter egg, and I've only seen a few people notice it. The Rickmobile. This is an appropriately named vehicle shaped like Rick bending over. In 2017, the Rickmobile launched a tour traveling across the United States. Inside the Rickmobile is a bunch of limited edition Rick and Morty merchandise, and so the vehicle served as a pop-up Rick and Morty shop. In 2024, the Rickmobile went on a little tour again, but this time to promote the Rick and Morty anime. Unfortunately, I missed out when it visited my city, so hopefully it comes around again. Interdimensional cable improv. I mentioned earlier how a lot of Justin Roiland's lines have actually been cut, and also how he recorded a lot of lines for the show drunk. Huge case for this is the 2 interdimensional cable episodes. When making these episodes, Roiland and other writers would sit around drinking for 4 to 5 hours, sometimes even longer, making up whatever they could off the top of their head. After these long sessions, the producers cut out only the best and funniest moments of the episode, but you can still hear little blunders like Roiland laughing at his own jokes. This also means that there's dozens of unheard interdimensional cable ideas, and if they ever surface, I'm sure a lot of them are quite funny. While it's pretty obvious that they feel improvised, a lot of people don't know the true story behind the improv themselves. Gene is immortal. This is an interesting entry because it refers to how, just like Rick, it seems like Gene, their neighbor, can never die. Gene is honestly the toughest person in the whole show. When Beth and Space Beth attacked him in season 7, he survived just fine, and he experienced the high-level antics of Rick and his friends despite being just a normal guy. And most interestingly, in the episode Rick Dependent Spray, when Rick is driving, he says he ran over Gene. However, in just the next episode, Gene is completely fine without a scratch. It seems like Gene during his time living next to Rick has become desensitized to his tech and even seems to know his way around it. It's a bold statement to say, but Rick's closest match human-wise might not be Evil Morty, but instead the regular old dude living next door. Level 6. Japanese dub cult following. During my research for this video, I stumbled across one of the most interesting fandoms pertaining to Rick and Morty, that being the large and dedicated fanbase in Japan. As early as 2016, Rick and Morty got an official Japanese dub which went extremely viral in Japan. The voice actors became iconic to the show and the country itself. When it came time to make an anime, these actors were so tied to the show that it was a no-brainer for production to bring them in. According to many other fans online too, Japan has a strong love for Rick and Morty. Apparently as well, the anime, which wasn't popular in America, also failed to have any appeal in Japan, and so the original show was by far their favorite. Roiland's Season 7 voiceovers. Just before Justin Roiland was fired, he had already started and finished all of his voice recordings for Season 7 of Rick and Morty. The entire season was even animated to perfectly be synced to his voice, causing a lot of trouble and hard work for the new voices trying to match his style perfectly. In order to make the new voices match animation, it's likely Roiland's recordings had to be played extensively as a reference, and with all that effort, I think they should have just used his original lines for one last season. It's weird to think about how much more people would like and talk about big episodes like Unmort Rickon and Fear No Mort if they had just been voiced by the far more famous Justin Roiland. No hate to the new actors though, they are great. Especially the Rick actor, he sounds more and more like Roiland every episode. The whole family is psychopathic. In the beginning of the show, the Smith family seems put off by the events caused by Rick, and especially Morty, who freaks out a lot at the stuff Rick does or is okay with. However, after years of adventures and hanging out with Rick, the entire family is acting more psychopathic than ever before. Morty, who showed heavy signs of remorse and guilt early on, later became a violent, uncontrollable force. Summer seems to be worried about herself more than anyone else and has become extremely violent as well. Beth is taken after her dad more and more and adapting into a female version of Rick, causing mass destruction. And of course, Rick shows very little remorse the whole show, and he is more or less the root of the family's evil. Jerry being the only one not related to Rick even is insane, because instead of being distraught by literally anything that's happened to him, he just lives his life like normal. While at one point the family was normal, they deep down have always been psychopathic evil people who only now take out their anger with murderous rampages. Tall Morty theory. This theory is an old one dating back to the episode Ricklantis Mix-Up, when inside of Morty's school, there's what looks like to be a Rick in a Morty costume who everyone makes fun of. What started off as a simple joke stirred up a lot of speculation. Instead of one centralized theory, it can be broken up into two individual theories. One is more straightforward, saying this Rick had a freak accident causing him to retain severe brain damage. If he is technically a Rick, then this has to be the only way, because the central finite curve would not allow him to be there if he wasn't the smartest in his dimension at some point. The second theory is that he's not a Rick at all, and actually a Morty stuck in a Rick's body as the name implies. Why else would there be someone who looks like a Rick in a Morty school? And based off the way he talks as well, it seems like he's been there for years. I tend to actually believe this theory more than the other one. Maybe Morty's intelligence in a Rick-sized brain averages out to him being incredibly stupid. There also was a third theory at one point saying this Rick could have been evil Morty's real Rick and he took his intelligence, but since we saw his backstory, we know that's not true. Fear hole theory. This next one is a theory I came up with myself. It's kind of like a Schrodinger's cat-like theory. Basically, in the fear hole episode, the whole point was that we as the audience never knew if Morty was still in the hole or not. And well, of course, neither did Morty. At one point, Morty lives out his entire life before realizing he was still in the hole. Genuinely, who's to say Morty isn't still in the hole? There's no way to tell. If we consider that, then there's an even deeper cut. What if somehow, someway, Rick is still trapped in the simulated world from season 1? They could even all be a part of a big matrix still. The point is that reality as we are watching in Rick and Morty might not even be real at all. The part that makes it all worth it is that we will never know, so it makes the show more suspenseful and more fun in general. However, I think there's still a real world where Morty is still being haunted by the fear hole. Jerry's intelligence. This entry refers to how Jerry might be the smartest person not named Rick Sanchez. Jerry, since the beginning of the show, has been portrayed as a jobless idiot. If you really dig deep though, Jerry is almost always coming out ahead. Jerry has strengths no one else in the family has, because when every other character overlooks him, doubts him, and makes fun of him, they can't take away his confidence and his own motivation. Jerry has proved he's incredibly capable of difficult tasks. He made a dating app which seemed like a terrible idea, but it had an entire planet addicted to it in just a day. He also wrote a simple book, and it ended up becoming an international bestseller. Jerry is incredibly smart in other facets besides raw intelligence like Rick. Rick considers Jerry to be a threat and tries so hard to neutralize him, but even with all of his godlike power, Jerry always wins. Jerry survived Cronenberg Dimension, he almost killed Rick Prime, he survived so many different dangerous situations, and that scares Rick. Jerry even has some of the best problem-solving skills in the whole series. Even if he's the butt of the joke a lot, his voice of reason saved the family countless times. If you ask me, Jerry is specifically Rick's kryptonite because no matter how much the odds are stacked up against him, he always seems to win. Chris Parnell's perfect recordings. An interesting thing I saw is that Chris Parnell, the actor for Jerry Smith, is nearly perfect in the recording booth. Parnell's background as a cast member of SNL meant he had very little room for error, given it was being filmed live in front of an audience. Bundle that with Jerry's voice being very similar to that of Parnell's real voice, he rarely ever uses his second or third takes. Justin Roiland and other showrunners have confirmed that Chris Parnell specifically chooses that they use his first take, saying it fits Jerry more. The fact that 99% or more of Jerry's lines are all perfect first takes is not only impressive relative to the show, but it's a monumental acting feat in general. This level of skill is something almost no actor has ever done, because most acting relies on 3 or more takes to get it just right, but Parnell always does it first take. So next time you watch Rick and Morty, just appreciate the legendary performance of Chris Parnell that has virtually never been done in the acting industry before. So that is my Rick and Morty iceberg. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is by far my longest video I'll probably ever make. So I hope you enjoyed and thank you for watching.